The Man with the Gold Watch. Owen Williams was a man defined by his relentless ambition and a knack for thriving in the unforgiving world of construction and corporate power. Clad in a sharp suit and a gold watch that seemed to sparkle with every movement, Owen sat rigidly in an uncomfortable airport chair, almost oblivious to the bustle and noise around him. The high-pitched squeal of a child nearby didn't even register in his mind, tuned as he was to his own thoughts. To anyone watching, Owen embodied success. His entire career had been devoted to building an empire from the ground up. He'd taken risks and fought tooth and nail to make his company what it was today. But appearances could be deceiving, and even a man like Owen had his own burdens to bear. Despite his facade of power and wealth, he was a man on the brink. His company, once thriving, was now teetering on the edge of collapse, and this flight was his last lifeline. The contract he hoped to secure was unlike any other he'd chased before. He built hotels, office buildings, and shopping centers, structures that made investors and developers plenty of money. But this contract was for an orphanage. In his world of hard-edged business and profit, the notion of constructing a home for abandoned children felt foreign and misplaced. But desperate times demanded desperate measures, and he was in no position to turn down the potential funding and reputation boost. Final boarding call for Flight 237, came the announcement, jolting Owen from his thoughts. With a heavy sigh, he gathered his leather briefcase, its finely aged hide a testament to years of business deals, and made his way toward the gate. His shoes, polished to a near-mirror finish, clicked sharply against the tiled floor. In his mind, he rehearsed his pitch, each sentence, each point of emphasis carefully calculated. He would speak of cost-effective designs, efficient timelines, and state-of-the-art facilities, things that would appease the wealthy investors who had no more connection to the orphanage than he did. The terminal was filled with families, vacationers, and business people, all with their own agendas. But Owen didn't bother to take in the humanity surrounding him. To him, this was just another place where he had to wait, to plan, and above all, to win. As he stepped into the jet bridge, a surge of people squeezed into the narrow hallway. Some bumped against him as they hurried past, and his mouth set in a thin, disapproving line. He was used to the business class experience. First to board, first to settle in. He had no patience for crowds, and he felt their presence like an invasion of his personal space. He arrived at his seat, situated conveniently in the front rows, with a relieved exhale. The luxury of business class was his sanctuary, a space where he could tune out the world and focus solely on the screen in front of him. Sliding his laptop out of his bag, he immediately opened his presentation file. The numbers scrolled past as he adjusted columns and scrutinized the profit margins. At that moment, a flight attendant's voice floated through the cabin. "Please allow our young passengers to board," she announced, and soon after, a small group of children filed down the aisle, escorted by flight attendants and guardians. Owen barely looked up, though he heard their laughter and chatter as they made their way to the rear of the plane. The sound grated on him, distracting him from his numbers and calculations. Just then, a young boy caught his attention as he walked past. The boy, around 12 years old, with dark skin and large, bright eyes, looked around with a mix of awe and excitement. Owen barely spared him a glance before turning back to his screen, but the boy hesitated beside Owen's seat, seemingly entranced by the sight of the laptop and the quick movements of Owen's fingers over the keys. "Excuse me, mister," the boy said with a hesitant but curious look. Owen, already irritated by the noise, glanced up with a hardened gaze, his fingers pausing over the keyboard. He wasn't accustomed to being interrupted, least of all by a child on a plane. "Yes," he replied, his voice sharp and cold. The boy's face dropped a little, but he braved on. "Are you working on something important?" Owen pursed his lips, giving the child an unsparing look of annoyance. "Yes, I am," he replied curtly. "Something very important." The boy looked like he wanted to ask another question, but sensing the dismissal, he nodded, looking a little embarrassed, and continued down the aisle. Owen shook his head as the boy walked away, his lips forming a tight line. He despised distractions, and the last thing he needed was a nosy kid meddling in his affairs. Minutes later, the plane began to fill, and more passengers struggled to fit their carry-ons into the overhead compartments. A woman a few rows back was trying to squeeze an oversized bag into the bin, clearly struggling. She caught his eye and offered a small apologetic smile as she worked to get her bag settled. Owen didn't bother to return her smile. In his world, time was money, and every second he wasted on this plane was a second he could have spent perfecting his proposal. He mentally brushed off the woman's unspoken request for help and dove back into his work. The boy's face popped into his mind briefly as he adjusted the margins on a slide. He shook his head, exasperated with himself. Why did he care about some kid's curiosity? This presentation was all that mattered right now. He needed to focus. After several minutes of fine-tuning, he leaned back and allowed himself a rare moment of relaxation. He closed his laptop, content with the progress he had made. He had perfected his pitch, meticulously ironed out the financial projections, and refined the technical details. He was ready, and he knew it. Just then, the flight attendant began making her way through the cabin with her safety demonstration. Owen barely paid attention, used to the routine as he was. Instead, he glanced around, taking in his fellow passengers with a detached eye. Beside him sat an older man, already absorbed in a thick novel, and in front of him, a middle-aged couple whispered quietly to each other, occasionally casting looks of affection. Across the aisle, he noticed a woman with a dignified air, her piercing eyes seemingly observing everything around her. Her gaze shifted, and for a split second, she met his eyes. Owen felt an odd sensation, as if she were seeing right through him. But he brushed it off. People glanced all the time, and he had no time for idle curiosity. Moments later, the plane lifted off, and the view of the city below shrank as they soared into the sky. Owen leaned back and closed his eyes, allowing himself a few minutes of mental respite. He knew he had to conserve his energy for the meeting awaiting him at the end of this journey. However, his reprieve was short-lived. Just as he was beginning to relax, he heard a soft voice from behind him. "Mom, why do some people look at others like they're better than them?" It was the voice of the boy from earlier, soft and questioning. A low murmur followed, perhaps the mother's response, but it was lost amidst the hum of the engines. Owen felt a flicker of irritation. Why did that boy have to sit so close? He was here to conduct serious business, and this kid's musings were nothing but a distraction. But there was something in the boy's voice that unsettled him, a tone of innocence mixed with a hint of sadness that Owen found himself trying to ignore. He pushed the thought away, refocusing on his upcoming presentation, reminding himself that he had no room for sentimentality or distractions. This was just another flight, just another day. Or so he thought. But unbeknownst to Owen, someone was watching. The woman across the aisle, with her poised demeanor and keen eyes, had taken note of the exchange. She had seen his dismissive glance toward the boy, his indifference toward the struggling woman, and the way he seemed to cocoon himself in an aura of superiority. Little did Owen know that his actions had been silently observed by someone who wielded influence beyond anything he could imagine. And in just a few hours, he would find himself face to face with a reality he couldn't ignore, one that would make him question everything he believed about himself and his place in the world. The stranger's secrets. The plane had leveled off, and the cabin was filled with the muted rustling of magazines, conversations, and the occasional ding of the flight attendant's call button. Owen settled back in his seat, finally feeling some semblance of calm as he reviewed his notes one more time. The hum of the engine served as a comforting background noise as he refined his mental pitch, mentally rehearsing how he'd address potential objections and pitch his construction prowess. This project was crucial, and he could already see the headlines announcing his company's revival if he landed the contract. But just as he was about to dive into another analysis of profit margins, he heard that same boy's voice from a few rows behind him. It was gentle but distinct enough to reach his ears over the hum of the engine. There was something oddly captivating about it. "Mom, when will we be there?" the boy asked, sounding more anxious than curious. "Do you think they'll like me?" Owen scowled. Children had a way of infiltrating his focus, and this one seemed determined to occupy his thoughts. He told himself to ignore it. This boy and his innocent insecurities were irrelevant to his life, his goals, and his ambitions. But that woman across the aisle, the one who had briefly locked eyes with him earlier, was now glancing toward the boy and his mother with a peculiar look in her eyes. Her expression was soft, sympathetic, and somehow wise. There was an air of calm authority about her, and despite himself, Owen couldn't help but be intrigued. She didn't belong in the usual business class crowd, with their suits and laptops, but there was a poise to her that felt powerful and out of place at the same time. A voice announced the food service over the intercom, pulling Owen out of his musings. Soon, trays of food were being passed around, and Owen, for once, was grateful for a distraction. He opened his tray and lifted the silver foil to reveal a neatly plated meal. Next to him, his seatmate was already eating, and across the aisle, the poised woman received her own tray, thanking the attendant with a soft, gracious smile. Owen absent-mindedly began to eat, still keeping an ear open for that boy's voice. It didn't take long for him to hear it again. "Mom, why do we have to sit here?" the boy asked quietly, his voice tinged with a hint of disappointment. The seats in the front looked so much nicer. Owen couldn't resist a slight smirk. The boy's question echoed the privilege that he, himself, had worked so hard to attain. The irony wasn't lost on him, even if the boy's comment was naive. "That's just how it is, honey," the mother replied, her tone gentle but resigned. "We'll get there soon enough. Just remember, it doesn't matter where we sit on the plane. What matters is where we're going." Across the aisle, the woman with the dignified presence glanced back toward the mother and her son, her face softening with understanding. Something about her demeanor was oddly magnetic, and Owen felt himself drawn to the calmness she seemed to exude. She appeared to be listening carefully, not in a prying way, but with a sort of quiet empathy. For reasons he couldn't quite explain, Owen's mind drifted back to a memory he hadn't visited in years, his own childhood, far removed from the world of success and wealth he inhabited now. He remembered the cramped buses he used to ride, his mother's firm grip on his hand as they squeezed in among other passengers, all headed to the same uncertain destinations. He remembered the discomfort and the occasional humiliation of being the one looking up at polished businessmen with their fancy watches and expensive suits, wondering what it would feel like to be them. He shook the memory off, almost annoyed at its intrusion. That was another life, another time, and he had long since shed those memories, replacing them with ambition and hard work. But just as he was about to redirect his attention to his laptop, he heard the boy again. "Mom, do you think they'll be nice to me? I don't know what to say to them." The mother offered soft words of reassurance, but Owen could hear the tremor in her voice. This boy, it seemed, was on a journey that was more than just a vacation. There was something else, a story behind their travel, one that resonated with a quiet determination and a hint of vulnerability. The boy's insecurities and the mother's steady, but weary, reassurances created a quiet intensity that piqued his curiosity in a way he hadn't expected. As he listened, Owen glanced over at the poised woman across the aisle. She was once again looking toward the boy and his mother, and this time, she held her gaze a little longer. Owen realized that she, too, was listening intently, though she remained unobtrusive. She offered the mother a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if to acknowledge and silently support her. The mother noticed and gave a tentative smile in return. Owen watched the interaction with an odd feeling simmering within him. There was a subtle understanding between these two women, a silent exchange that he couldn't quite decipher. He felt out of place, as if he was observing a moment too private for his presence, but he couldn't tear his attention away. The boy's mother turned, perhaps sensing the presence of people watching her, and her gaze fell on Owen for the briefest moment. She offered a polite smile, her eyes filled with kindness, and something he couldn't quite place, a mixture of determination and vulnerability. Owen nodded curtly, returning his attention to his laptop, though he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just been acknowledged in a way that transcended mere politeness. Moments later, the boy began flipping through the in-flight magazine, trying to pass the time. Owen, despite his focus on his presentation, found himself watching the boy's fingers trace the photos on each page. The boy's eyes lit up at the colorful images, and he whispered a comment to his mother, who chuckled softly in response. The simplicity of the interaction struck Owen in a way he hadn't anticipated. There was something endearing and grounding about it, a reminder of life outside of spreadsheets, deadlines, and boardroom battles. Before he could refocus, the poised woman across the aisle cleared her throat, breaking the silence. "It's lovely to see a child so curious and bright," she said, her voice carrying a warm authority. She directed her comment to the boy's mother, but her eyes swept over Owen as well, as if inviting him to acknowledge something deeper. The mother looked over, clearly a bit surprised, but nodded with a grateful smile. "He's got a good heart," she said softly. "We're heading to meet some family we haven't seen in a while. He's a bit nervous, but he's excited too." The boy smiled shyly, his gaze flickering to the woman, and then back to the magazine in his hands. Owen looked at the woman with a faint curiosity. Who was she, this woman who had the confidence to initiate a conversation in an environment where most people hid behind their screens or books? She looked like she belonged in a world of her own, yet she seemed effortlessly connected to those around her. Sensing his gaze, she turned her eyes toward him and offered a slight, knowing smile. "Children have a way of reminding us of what's important," she said, almost as if she were addressing a hidden question in his mind. Owen's lips tightened, unsure of how to respond. He wasn't used to conversations that dealt in such ambiguities, in themes of importance that felt sentimental. He offered a stiff nod, choosing to remain silent rather than engage in a discussion that he felt ill-equipped for. But the woman didn't seem to mind his reticence. She looked back at the boy, who was now animatedly showing his mother a photo of a cityscape in the magazine. Owen caught a glimpse of a longing in the mother's face, a hope that maybe their lives could be different, better. Minutes passed, and as the cabin lights dimmed for the night flight, Owen found himself glancing back at the boy and his mother more often than he intended. He'd never cared much for kids, and yet something about this mother-son pair was drawing him in, tugging at a part of him he'd buried long ago. It was almost as if they were symbols of something he'd lost on his climb to the top. The woman across the aisle remained poised and attentive, almost as if she was waiting for something. Owen didn't realize it at the time, but she knew far more about him than he could ever imagine. Her knowing gaze and calm demeanor were the result of experiences he couldn't fathom, and as the night wore on, he would come to see her presence as more than just a coincidence. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a strange unease began to take root. He pushed it aside, focusing on his laptop, reminding himself of the importance of this project. Yet, no matter how hard he tried to immerse himself in his work, he couldn't escape the nagging sensation that this flight, and these seemingly insignificant interactions, were about to lead him down a path he hadn't anticipated. A path that would ultimately test everything he thought he knew about power, purpose, and prejudice. The power of unseen eyes. Owen couldn't seem to shake his discomfort. For the first time in as long as he could remember, he felt vulnerable. His meticulously constructed world of deals, profit margins, and grand ambitions had no place for the messy, unpredictable realities of life outside business. Yet here he was, inexplicably drawn into the lives of strangers. A young boy with bright eyes and big questions, a mother with quiet strength and humility, and a mysterious woman who seemed to see more than anyone should. And as much as he wanted to deny it, these strangers were beginning to disrupt his carefully guarded fortress of self-interest. As the flight continued, the cabin lights dimmed to a soft glow, allowing passengers to settle into the lull of the journey. Some had fallen asleep, while others thumbed through books or stared blankly at the screens in front of them. Owen's screen, however, remained dimmed, his mind far from the numbers and presentation slides he'd been consumed with only hours ago. His gaze kept drifting toward the boy and his mother, who were nestled into their seats, sharing quiet exchanges that exuded warmth and love, something Owen had long ago dismissed as irrelevant. The boy, not one for staying still, was now looking around the cabin, his eyes wide with wonder. His gaze landed on Owen, who happened to look up at the same moment. Their eyes met, and for a brief, startling second, Owen felt as though he were looking into a mirror that didn't reflect his outward appearance, but something deeper, something he hadn't acknowledged in years. "Hi again," the boy said, a shy smile creeping onto his face. Owen nodded stiffly, unsure of what to say. He wasn't accustomed to casual conversations, least of all with children. The boy's openness unsettled him. "I'm Nathan," the boy continued, as though his name was the most important information in the world. "What's yours?" "Owen," he replied, somewhat reluctantly. He glanced down at his laptop, hoping the boy would take the hint, but Nathan only seemed more intrigued. "Are you a businessman?" Nathan asked, his tone a mixture of curiosity and admiration. "Yes," Owen replied, his voice clipped but polite. "I work in construction." "Wow," Nathan said, genuinely impressed. "So you build stuff? Like houses and buildings?" Owen hesitated. For the first time, his usual pride in his work faltered. How could he explain the world of profit margins, market trends, and cost-cutting to a child who saw construction as nothing more than building something for people to live in? "Yes," he replied finally, choosing his words carefully. "I make sure buildings are safe and comfortable for people." Nathan's eyes lit up. "That's awesome. Do you think you could build something like a school or maybe a castle?" Owen chuckled despite himself, caught off guard by the boy's enthusiasm. "Well, maybe not a castle, but I am working on a project that helps kids have a safe place to live." Nathan's eyes grew even wider, and for a moment, Owen felt a strange, unexpected warmth. But then, just as quickly, he felt a pang of discomfort. The truth was, he didn't care about the orphanage project. To him, it was just a lifeline to save his company, a transaction that could prevent financial ruin. The realization left a bitter taste in his mouth. Just then, the woman across the aisle spoke up, her voice carrying a gentle authority that seemed to settle everyone around her. "Sometimes, we don't realize the impact we have on others, especially when we're building something that people will call home." Owen looked at her, startled. Her words were simple, but they carried a weight that cut through his defenses. She hadn't spoken to him directly, but it was clear her words were meant for him. Her gaze met his, steady and penetrating, and he felt exposed, as though she could see right through his carefully constructed image. The boy's mother looked over, sensing the tension, and gave Owen an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry if Nathan is bothering you. He's just a curious kid." Owen cleared his throat, feeling an unfamiliar discomfort. "No, it's fine. Really." The woman across the aisle gave a soft smile, her eyes shimmering with an almost knowing expression. "Curiosity is a gift," she said, turning her attention to Nathan. "It's the way we learn to understand the world." Nathan beamed at her, clearly encouraged by her words. He had no idea that he'd somehow become the center of an interaction that was shifting the balance of the entire cabin. As the silence stretched, Owen found himself studying the woman more closely. She was elegant in an understated way, her posture straight and dignified, her clothing simple but refined. There was something almost regal about her, a sense of authority that didn't demand attention but commanded respect nonetheless. Unable to resist his curiosity, Owen finally spoke up. "Forgive me, but I feel like I've seen you before. Are you in business as well?" The woman smiled, a faint glimmer of amusement in her eyes. "In a way, yes, though perhaps not in the same way you are." Her response was vague, but there was a hint of mischief in her tone that intrigued him further. She turned to Nathan's mother, her expression softening. It's not easy, traveling with a child on a long journey. You're doing a wonderful job." The mother gave her a grateful smile, a trace of weariness evident in her eyes. "Thank you. We're actually on our way to meet some family. It's been a long time since we've seen them." The woman nodded, her gaze compassionate. "Family is worth any journey, no matter how long or challenging. I'm sure they'll be overjoyed to see you both." Owen felt a pang of discomfort, realizing that he hadn't visited his own family in years. He'd lost touch with his roots, too absorbed in his quest for success to remember where he came from. And now, surrounded by people who seemed to live with purpose beyond personal gain, he was beginning to question the choices he'd made. The woman across the aisle seemed to sense his unease. She met his gaze again, her expression gentle yet unwavering. "Sometimes, in the rush to achieve, we lose sight of why we began in the first place. It's easy to forget what truly matters." Her words struck a nerve, and Owen felt himself growing defensive. Who was this woman to question his choices? She didn't know the sacrifices he'd made, the hours he poured into building his company, the sleepless nights spent worrying about the future. But a part of him recognized the truth in her words, and it left him feeling strangely hollow. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken thoughts, and Owen felt a need to break it, to regain control of the conversation. "I understand that you believe in family and purpose," he said, his tone guarded. "But for some of us, life is about survival. We do what we have to succeed. That's the world we live in." The woman nodded thoughtfully, her gaze unwavering. "Survival is important, yes. But sometimes, the way we choose to survive can shape us more than we realize." Her words lingered, settling into the quiet spaces of his mind. She wasn't challenging him or belittling his achievements. She was simply offering a perspective he'd long ignored. For a man who thrived on control and certainty, the ambiguity of her words left him feeling strangely unsettled. Before he could respond, a ding sounded, signaling that the flight attendants would soon prepare the cabin for descent. Owen glanced out the window, noticing the faint lights of the city below as they approached their destination. A mixture of relief and apprehension washed over him. The flight was nearly over, and with it, this strange, introspective journey he hadn't anticipated. As the plane began its descent, the woman across the aisle leaned toward him slightly, her expression soft yet serious. "Remember, Mr. Williams," she said quietly, "sometimes we're given opportunities to make a difference, to touch lives in ways we may never fully understand. Your work on that project may mean more than you realize, not just to you, but to those who will call it home." Owen felt a lump form in his throat, caught off guard by the unexpected weight of her words. She knew about his project. How could she have known? He hadn't mentioned it to anyone on this flight. But before he could ask, she turned her attention back to her bag, preparing for the landing. In the moments that followed, as the plane touched down and taxied to the gate, Owen sat in silence, his mind racing with questions and emotions he couldn't quite process. The woman's words echoed in his mind, challenging his perceptions, forcing him to confront parts of himself he'd buried long ago. As passengers began gathering their belongings, Owen looked over at the woman one last time, but she was already lost in the crowd, her graceful figure disappearing down the aisle. For a moment, he felt an overwhelming urge to follow her, to demand answers, to understand the meaning behind her words. But then he caught sight of Nathan, who was waving goodbye to him with a shy smile. Owen managed a small wave in return, feeling an unexpected surge of warmth. He didn't know what lay ahead, but as he left the plane and walked through the terminal, he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter had been more than mere coincidence. He'd been given a glimpse into a world beyond his own, a world of compassion, purpose, and connection. And as he stepped out into the cool night air, he realized that maybe, just maybe, his journey was only beginning. An unexpected invitation. As Owen stepped out of the terminal and into the crisp evening air, he felt like he was emerging from a cocoon. Everything around him felt sharper, more vivid. The cars rushing past, the chatter of families reuniting, the laughter of friends. It all felt magnified, pulling him out of the fog of his own ambition. The woman's words lingered in his mind, echoing in ways he didn't quite understand. He made his way to the curb, where a car was waiting to take him to his hotel. The city lights twinkled in the distance, a mosaic of hope and promise. But tonight, they felt like reminders of something more. As he climbed into the back seat, he glanced at his phone, already buzzing with emails and notifications. His assistant had sent him a few last-minute updates on the meeting scheduled for the next day. The orphanage project, the contract he'd been so focused on securing, felt heavier now, burdened with the weight of something he hadn't anticipated. Just as he was about to open his emails, he noticed a message from an unknown number. Hesitating, he opened it, expecting it to be spam or a misdialed number. But as he read the message, his heart skipped a beat. "Mr. Williams, I hope this message finds you well. I wanted to extend an invitation to meet tomorrow morning at the community center near the project site. There are some people I think you should meet before your meeting. I believe it will give you a clearer perspective on your project's true purpose. Best regards, Nora Anderson." Owen felt a jolt of recognition. Nora Anderson. Was that the woman from the plane? How had she gotten his number? He stared at the message, torn between intrigue and irritation. Who was she to tell him what he needed to see, to suggest that he didn't already understand his own project? And yet, he couldn't ignore the pull he felt, the faint whisper of curiosity that urged him to take her invitation seriously. With a sigh, he typed a short response, agreeing to meet her in the morning. He convinced himself that it would be a quick visit, a formality at best, before he focused on the real business of securing the contract. But as he settled into his hotel room later that night, he found himself staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the feeling that tomorrow would be anything but ordinary. The next morning dawned bright and clear, casting a golden light over the city. Owen's driver took him through streets lined with small shops, old buildings, and narrow alleyways. It was a part of the city he would usually ignore, one that didn't fit into his pristine vision of success and power. Yet today, he found himself looking out the window, taking in the sights as if seeing them for the first time. When they arrived at the community center, he hesitated at the entrance, feeling out of place in his tailored suit and polished shoes. The building was modest but well kept, with children's artwork displayed in the windows and potted plants lining the entrance. As he stepped inside, the faint smell of fresh coffee and baked goods greeted him, along with a murmur of voices and laughter. Nora was waiting for him just inside the door, her calm, dignified presence unchanged from the day before. She wore a simple dress and a warm smile, and she greeted him with a handshake that felt genuine, almost comforting. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Williams," she said, her eyes holding that same knowing look he'd seen on the plane. "I thought it might be helpful for you to meet some of the people this project will impact." Owen managed a nod, feeling a mix of curiosity and discomfort. "Thank you for the invitation," he replied. "Though I have to say, I'm not entirely sure why I'm here." Nora's smile widened, a hint of amusement in her eyes. Sometimes, understanding a project requires more than just numbers and projections, she said, leading him down a hallway. It requires understanding the lives it will touch. They stopped outside a small room where a group of children were gathered, playing games and painting on large sheets of paper. Owen's gaze fell on a boy he recognized immediately, Nathan, the curious child from the plane. He was sitting with a few other children, laughing and chatting as they worked on their art. Nathan's mother was there too, helping a little girl mix colors on her palette. "Wait," Owen said, surprised. "That's Nathan, from the flight." Nora nodded, her expression soft. "Yes, Nathan and his mother are newcomers to our community. They've had a difficult journey, but they're hoping to make a fresh start here." Owen watched as Nathan's mother smiled at her son, her face radiating a quiet joy that made him feel something he couldn't quite name. It was strange, seeing this family outside the context of the plane, seeing them as real people with dreams, struggles, and hopes of their own. Nathan's mother. She's looking for stable housing, a safe place for her son, Nora continued. The orphanage project isn't just a building, Mr. Williams. It's a promise to families like theirs. A promise of hope, stability, and the chance to rebuild. Owen felt a pang of guilt as he realized he'd seen the project as little more than numbers on a spreadsheet, a means to an end. He had never considered the lives behind those numbers, the people who would fill the rooms, who would call this building their home. As he stood there, grappling with his thoughts, a young girl approached, tugging on Nora's sleeve. She looked up at Owen with wide eyes, her face smudged with paint. "Hi, are you going to help build our new home?" she asked, her voice filled with a sincerity that struck Owen like a blow. He glanced at Nora, uncertain, and then back at the girl. "Yes," he said after a pause, his voice softening. I'm working on it." The girl beamed, her face lighting up with joy. "I'm going to have my own room," she announced proudly. "Mom says it'll be the best room ever." Owen felt an unexpected lump in his throat as he watched her run back to her friends, her laughter filling the room. For the first time in years, he felt something beyond the relentless drive for success, beyond the need to prove himself. He felt the weight of responsibility, not just to his company, but to these children and families who were counting on him. Nora must have sensed his inner conflict because she placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, guiding him to a quieter corner of the room. "I wanted you to see this, Mr. Williams," she said, her tone calm but firm. "I wanted you to understand that this project isn't just about saving a business. It's about saving lives, about giving children a safe place to dream, to grow, to thrive." Owen looked down, unable to meet her gaze. "I didn't realize," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "I've been so focused on the numbers, on the risks. I didn't think about this." "That's the trouble with success sometimes," Nora replied gently. "It can narrow our vision, make us lose sight of the world around us. But every once in a while, life gives us a chance to open our eyes again, to see beyond ourselves." Owen nodded, her words resonating deeply within him. For years, he had defined himself by his achievements, by the contracts he'd won, and the buildings he'd erected. But standing here, surrounded by children who saw him as someone who could bring hope into their lives, he felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced before. Before he could say more, a group of community members entered the room, joining the children. They were volunteers, parents, and local residents, all united by a common goal: building a better future for their community. They greeted Owen with warm smiles and grateful words, their appreciation evident in every handshake and nod. One of the volunteers, an older man with silver hair and calloused hands, approached Owen, his eyes filled with a fierce pride. "Thank you for what you're doing here, Mr. Williams," he said, his voice rough but sincere. "We've needed a place like this for a long time. You're giving our kids a fighting chance." Owen swallowed, feeling an unfamiliar emotion rise within him. "I'm honored," he replied, surprised at how much he meant it. As he looked around, taking in the faces of the people who would benefit from his work, he felt something shift within him. The orphanage was no longer just a project to save his company. It was a mission, a chance to make a difference in ways he'd never imagined. Nora, standing beside him, seemed to read his thoughts. She offered him a smile, her eyes filled with a quiet pride. "I think you're beginning to see why I invited you here," she said softly. "The impact of our work goes beyond what we see on paper. It touches lives, changes futures." Owen nodded, his heart full of conflicting emotions. He had come here thinking he was saving his business, but instead he had been given a gift, an opportunity to redefine his purpose, to see his work not just as a means to an end, but as a way to build something that mattered. As he left the community center that day, the voices of the children and families echoed in his mind, their gratitude filling the spaces he had once filled with ambition, and for the first time in a long time, he felt that perhaps he was on the path to building something truly meaningful. A new vision, Owen left the community center that morning with a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in years. The quiet determination of the families, the vibrant hope in the eyes of the children, and Nora's unwavering calm all lingered in his thoughts. He'd built dozens of projects over his career, some towering skyscrapers, others sprawling luxury complexes, but none had ever filled him with a sense of purpose like this orphanage project. He found himself walking slowly back to his car, savoring the warmth of the sun on his face, the sounds of the neighborhood, the laughter of children in the park nearby, the faint hum of morning traffic. There was a richness to it, a life that he had spent years ignoring, and now he felt strangely part of it. Even his driver, accustomed to his brisk, no-nonsense demeanor, raised an eyebrow in surprise as Owen casually climbed into the car, not his usual brisk, sharp self but relaxed, almost contemplative. Back at his hotel, he checked his phone, noticing a flurry of emails and notifications. His team had sent updates, a few colleagues had questions about upcoming projects, and a couple of investors had emailed with concerns about his company's shaky financial standing. Normally, these emails would have commanded his immediate attention, each subject line triggering a new calculation in his mind, each concern a problem to be solved. But today, he left them unanswered. Today, he needed time to think, to reevaluate. Sitting by the hotel room window, he pulled out his laptop and opened his presentation, the proposal he'd spent countless hours perfecting. The slides were meticulously organized, each graph, projection, and detail polished to a near-obsessive standard. But now, as he reviewed the document, he found it lacking. It was efficient, yes, clearly designed to appeal to the investors with promises of low costs, quick returns, and innovative design. But it was empty, devoid of the humanity he'd seen in the community center. He leaned back, staring at the screen. His mind drifted back to Nathan and his mother, the look of wonder on Nathan's face when he spoke of having his own room, his own space. He remembered the girl who had tugged on Nora's sleeve, asking if he was building their new home. And he remembered the older volunteer's rough, sincere handshake, his gratitude radiating from him like a tangible warmth. Owen realized that his proposal needed to be more than just numbers and efficiency. It needed to reflect the lives it would impact, the hope it would bring, the futures it would shape. And so, he began to rewrite. Hours passed as he worked, his fingers moving over the keyboard with an energy that surprised him. He added new sections, detailing the ways the orphanage would support families, the resources it would provide to children in need, the safe spaces it would create for them to learn, grow, and dream. He rewrote the design section, no longer focused solely on cost efficiency, but on creating spaces that would feel warm, welcoming, and safe, a place that children could call home. He envisioned a courtyard where children could play, study nooks with bright, open windows where they could read, and quiet rooms where they could talk to counselors, teachers, and mentors. He wanted this building to be more than just walls and a roof. He wanted it to be a sanctuary. When he finally finished, the sun was beginning to set, casting a warm, golden glow over the city outside his window. Owen saved the document, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. He had never felt this way about a project before, never felt this depth of connection, this sense of responsibility. He was no longer just building a structure. He was building a future for children and families who had little else to rely on. He closed his laptop and sat in silence for a moment, reflecting on what he had created. It wasn't perfect. It would still need refining, tweaking. But it was honest. It was a proposal that came from his heart, not just his mind. The next morning, Owen arrived at the firm's headquarters with a renewed sense of purpose. The office building was sleek and imposing, a testament to the wealth and power that thrived within. But as he stepped through the glass doors, he no longer felt the intimidation or pressure he'd once associated with these halls. He was here not to impress, but to share a vision, one that he believed in deeply. In the conference room, a group of investors and board members awaited him. They were a typical group, polished, impeccably dressed, their expressions neutral but expectant. At the head of the table sat Mr. Langston, the firm's chief executive, a man known for his ruthless pragmatism and demand for results. Owen greeted them all with a confident nod, setting his briefcase down and connecting his laptop to the projector. He took a deep breath, allowing the nervousness to wash over him and fade, focusing on the faces before him instead. He saw in their eyes a hint of skepticism, the same doubt he had faced countless times before. But today, it didn't faze him. As he began his presentation, he felt an energy, a conviction, carrying him forward. He spoke about the orphanage not just as a project, but as a lifeline, a place that would offer children stability, security, and hope. He talked about the families he'd met, the community's needs, and the profound impact that this building could have on lives often overlooked. "I know this may seem different from our usual projects," he said, addressing Mr. Langston directly, "but I believe that this is more than just another construction job. It's a chance to do something meaningful, to build a legacy that goes beyond profit and loss statements. This orphanage won't just be a building. It will be a home, a refuge, a symbol of hope." He paused, gauging the room's reaction. Some of the investors were nodding, clearly moved by his words, while others looked contemplative, perhaps even intrigued. Mr. Langston, however, remained impassive, his gaze sharp and appraising. "What's your projected profit margin on this project, Owen?" Langston asked, his tone even but firm. Owen had anticipated this question, and though he knew it would be lower than usual, he answered confidently. "Our profit margin will be more modest, yes. But the long-term value of this project goes beyond immediate profit. It will build our reputation, establish us as a firm that cares about the communities we serve. And frankly, I believe that the goodwill generated by this project will pay dividends in ways we can't quantify." Langston studied him, his gaze inscrutable. The room was silent, and Owen felt his heart pounding, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He knew he was taking a risk, knew that by prioritizing purpose over profit, he was challenging the very foundation of his industry's values. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Langston nodded slowly. "I'll admit, this is a new approach for us. But there's a certain logic to what you're proposing, especially if we can use it to attract future projects that value social impact." Owen felt a surge of relief, though he kept his expression calm and professional. Langston's words might have been pragmatic, but they were a step in the right direction, a sign that even in the most cutthroat of industries, there was room for change, for progress. The rest of the meeting proceeded with fewer objections than he'd expected. The investors asked questions, some probing and challenging, but Owen answered each one with the same calm conviction. By the time he finished, he sensed a shift in the room, a recognition that this project, this orphanage, was more than just an opportunity for profit. It was a chance to create something that would stand as a testament to their values, a legacy of compassion and care. As he left the conference room, Owen felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had done more than just present a proposal. He had shared a vision, one that transcended numbers and metrics, one that spoke to the heart. On his way out, he received a text from Nora. "Congratulations, Owen. I heard the presentation went well. It's amazing what a difference a little perspective can make." Owen smiled, marveling at how Nora seemed to know everything, always one step ahead. He replied with a simple thank you. There was no need for more words. She understood the journey he'd taken. As he left the building, he found himself looking forward to the next steps, to seeing this project come to life. For the first time in years, he felt truly aligned with his work, filled with a sense of purpose that no amount of money or status could replace. He knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy, that there would be challenges, setbacks, and sacrifices. But he also knew that he wasn't alone. There was a community behind him, a group of people counting on him, and a vision that would guide him every step of the way. This project had started as a desperate attempt to save his company, but now it had transformed into something far greater, a mission to build not just walls and rooms, but futures, dreams, and hope. And with every step, Owen knew that he was becoming a part of something meaningful, something lasting. The orphanage was no longer just a contract. It was a legacy. Building futures. Weeks turned into months, and the orphanage project moved from blueprints to the physical worksite. Owen found himself at the construction site nearly every day, dressed in hard hats and boots rather than tailored suits, standing shoulder to shoulder with architects, contractors, and community volunteers who shared his commitment to seeing this vision come to life. He became a fixture at the site, greeting the workers by name, overseeing the progress, and offering words of encouragement. As he walked the grounds one morning, he noticed a group of local children gathered near the fence, watching the construction with wide, curious eyes. Nathan was among them, waving excitedly when he spotted Owen. His mother, standing nearby, waved as well, and Owen found himself smiling back, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in years. He approached them, leaning down to talk to the kids, who were full of questions about the building: how tall it would be, how many rooms it would have, and whether they could help decorate. "We'll have a big playground right over there," Owen said, pointing to a cleared patch of land. "And inside, there will be rooms for reading, games, and even a little theater where you can put on shows." The children's eyes widened with excitement, and Nathan stepped forward, looking up at Owen with admiration. "Mr. Williams, can I help build something?" he asked earnestly. "Maybe paint a wall or something." Owen chuckled, touched by the boy's enthusiasm. "Absolutely," he replied. "When we get to the painting part, you'll be the first one I call. All right." Nathan nodded eagerly, his face glowing with pride. His mother, who had been standing quietly to the side, approached Owen, gratitude evident in her expression. "Thank you, Mr. Williams," she said softly. "For all of this, you've done so much for our community. You're giving these children a future they can believe in." Owen felt a lump rise in his throat. He'd spent so many years of his life focused on profit and status, convinced that success was measured by financial gain and recognition. But standing here, surrounded by children who would soon have a place to call home, he realized that he had found something far more valuable. As the building began to take shape, word of the project spread throughout the city, drawing attention from local media and community leaders. Nora, who had been a steady presence throughout the process, often appeared at the site, watching the progress with a quiet pride. She became a bridge between Owen and the community, introducing him to local leaders, organizing volunteer days, and even bringing coffee and snacks for the workers. One afternoon, as they watched a group of volunteers paint the interior walls in bright, cheerful colors, Nora turned to Owen, her gaze filled with gratitude. "You've come a long way, Owen," she said, her voice warm. "This place is already so much more than just a building. It's a promise to these children that they are valued and loved." Owen nodded, feeling a wave of emotions he couldn't quite put into words. "I never thought I'd find this kind of purpose in my work," he admitted. "For so long, I saw my projects as just deals to close, numbers on a page. But this, it's different. It's real." Nora smiled, her eyes twinkling with that familiar knowing look. "That's the beauty of community, Owen. It has a way of reminding us what truly matters, of pulling us out of our own heads and into the lives of others." They stood in comfortable silence, watching as a group of children ran through the half-finished hallways, their laughter echoing through the building. For the first time, Owen felt like he was part of something far greater than himself, something that would endure long after he was gone. The grand opening of the orphanage was set for a sunny autumn afternoon. The entire community gathered for the event, eager to see the finished building and celebrate the hard work that had brought it to life. Banners were strung up along the entrance, balloons bobbed in the breeze, and tables filled with food lined the courtyard. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement and anticipation. Owen stood at the entrance, watching the families and children who had come to see their new home. He wore a suit for the occasion, but it was a different suit than the ones he'd worn in boardrooms, a simpler, softer ensemble that mirrored the change he'd undergone. This wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about honoring the people who had made this project possible. Nathan spotted him from across the courtyard and ran over, his face glowing with excitement. "Mr. Williams, it's amazing. I love it," he exclaimed, bouncing on his toes. Owen crouched down to Nathan's level, grinning. "I'm glad you like it, Nathan. Remember, this is your home now, a place where you can be anything you want to be." Nathan nodded, his eyes shining. "I'm going to be a builder, like you," he said with determination. "I want to make places like this for other kids someday." Owen felt his heart swell with pride. "You'll be a great builder, Nathan. And when you do, I'll be cheering you on." As the ceremony began, Nora took the stage to welcome everyone, her voice clear and resonant, as she spoke about the importance of the orphanage, not just as a building, but as a symbol of hope and resilience for the community. She thanked the volunteers, the workers, the families, and finally, she turned to Owen, inviting him to join her on stage. Owen took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of nerves and gratitude as he approached the microphone. Looking out at the crowd, he saw familiar faces, the workers who had labored beside him, the families he'd come to know, the children who had inspired him. For a moment, he struggled to find the right words. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice steady. "When I first started this project, I saw it as just another contract, another building to construct. But along the way, thanks to each of you, it became something much more. It became a reminder of what's possible when people come together, when we build not just with bricks and mortar, but with compassion and hope." He paused, looking out at the crowd. "This orphanage isn't just my work, it's our work. It's a testament to the power of community, to the strength we find in one another. And I want you all to know that this place belongs to you. This is your home, your sanctuary." A ripple of applause spread through the crowd, and Owen felt a profound sense of peace wash over him. He had found his place, not in the skyscrapers and high-rise towers, but here, among people who cared deeply about each other and the future of their children. As the ceremony concluded, families began to tour the building, exploring the rooms and spaces that had been designed with so much love and intention. Owen watched as children ran through the hallways, claiming their rooms, discovering the play areas, and marveling at the colorful murals painted on the walls. He saw Nathan with his mother, both of them beaming with joy as they walked through the rooms they could now call their own. Nora approached him, a satisfied smile on her face. "You did it, Owen," she said softly. "You built more than a structure. You built a future." Owen nodded, a deep sense of fulfillment settling in his heart. "I had a lot of help along the way," he replied, his gaze meeting hers. "I don't think I would have seen any of this if it weren't for you." Nora gave him a warm smile. "Sometimes, all we need is a little perspective," she said. "And sometimes, we need a reminder that success isn't about what we accumulate, but about what we leave behind." They stood together, watching as the families explored their new home, as the children laughed and played, filling the building with life. Owen felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the opportunity to build this orphanage, but for the journey that had brought him here, for the people who had shown him a different path. In the weeks and months that followed, Owen's life took on a new direction. He continued his work in construction, but his focus shifted. He sought out projects that aligned with his new values, projects that would impact communities, build futures, and offer hope. He became known not just as a successful businessman, but as a man who built with heart, a man who cared deeply about the lives he touched. The orphanage stood as a lasting legacy, a symbol of compassion and resilience in the heart of the community. And every time Owen visited, he saw the impact of his work, the laughter of children, the gratitude of families, the sense of belonging that filled every room. Years later, he returned to the orphanage for another event, a celebration of its anniversary. Nathan, now a young man, approached him with a smile, his face full of determination and promise. "Mr. Williams," Nathan said, shaking his hand, "I wanted you to know that I'm studying architecture. I'm going to build places like this one day, just like you taught me." Owen felt a surge of pride, a feeling deeper and more satisfying than any award or accolade he'd ever received. He realized, in that moment, that his legacy was not in the buildings themselves, but in the lives they had transformed, the futures they had inspired. And as he walked through the familiar halls of the orphanage, surrounded by memories, laughter, and hope, he knew that he had found his true purpose, not in success as the world defined it, but in the simple, enduring act of building futures, planting seeds of legacy. Several years had passed since the orphanage had first opened its doors, and Owen Williams's life had changed in ways he hadn't anticipated. What began as a desperate bid to salvage his company had evolved into a journey of personal transformation, and the orphanage stood as a testament to that journey. Now his focus was no longer on accumulating projects for profit, but on creating spaces that fostered connection, community, and care. One cool spring morning, Owen received a letter. It arrived in a plain envelope, with neat handwriting spelling out his name. He rarely received personal letters anymore. Most correspondence came through email or his office. He opened it, intrigued, and read the carefully penned words. "Dear Mr. Williams, I don't know if you'll remember me, but I was one of the children in the community who watched you build the orphanage. My name is Leela, and I'm one of the first to have grown up there. Today, I'm writing to you from my dorm room at university. I'm studying social work because I want to give back to children like me, children who needed a safe place to call home. I wanted you to know how much that building meant to me and the other kids. It wasn't just a shelter. It was a sanctuary where we felt seen and loved. I grew up with friends who became like family, and we had people who believed in us, encouraged us, and pushed us to dream. Thank you for giving us that, and thank you for believing in something bigger than just a building. You changed my life, and I promise to carry your legacy forward in every life I touch. With gratitude and admiration. Leela Jacobs." Owen sat back in his chair, reading the letter over and over, feeling a wave of emotion he hadn't expected. Lila's words reached deep into him, reminding him of the countless lives that his work had touched, of the quiet, unseen impacts that rippled out from that single project. He thought back to the day of the opening ceremony, to the children running through the building with wonder in their eyes, to the parents who had hugged him with tearful gratitude. The orphanage had been just the beginning, the first step on a path that had reshaped his values and redefined his purpose. Now, he was involved in multiple projects across the city, community centers, schools, shelters for families in need. Each project was a seed he planted, knowing that it would grow into something meaningful, something that would change lives. But the letter stirred something more in him, a realization that while he had found his purpose, there was still more to do. He wanted to ensure that his work would continue long after he was gone, that the seeds he had planted would be nurtured and cultivated by others. With renewed determination, Owen decided to establish a foundation in his name, a nonprofit that would support projects aimed at uplifting underserved communities. It would be his legacy, a commitment to building futures for generations to come. He reached out to Nora, knowing she would be the perfect partner to help him bring this vision to life. A few weeks later, Nora and Owen sat in his office, poring over the details of the foundation. Nora, with her quiet wisdom and unwavering dedication, had become not just a mentor but a trusted friend and confidant. She had been instrumental in helping him see beyond the world of profit margins, and now, together, they were laying the groundwork for an organization that would embody the values she had helped him cultivate. The Foundation's mission, Nora said, tapping her pen thoughtfully on a notepad, should be centered on building spaces of hope, but it should also focus on mentorship, education, and community support. This isn't just about buildings. It's about creating an ecosystem of support. Owen nodded, deeply engaged. I want the foundation to be a beacon for anyone who needs a safe place, for anyone who wants to find their footing. And I want it to be self-sustaining, something that doesn't rely on donations alone, but has investments that fund the projects, so it can keep growing. They discussed plans for scholarships, funding for community projects, and partnerships with local schools and organizations. As they brainstormed, Owen felt a sense of clarity and purpose that he hadn't felt since the orphanage project. This was the culmination of everything he'd learned, a way to solidify his commitment to building a better future. The foundation's launch event was held in the very orphanage that had started it all. It was a symbolic gesture, a return to the roots of his transformation. The orphanage had grown since its opening. It now boasted a library, a technology center, and a garden where children could learn about plants and nature. Standing in the courtyard surrounded by familiar faces and new ones, Owen felt the magnitude of what he had created. Nathan was there, now an intern in architecture, full of the same bright enthusiasm he had as a boy. Leela attended as well, having taken time off from university to celebrate the launch of the foundation that, unbeknownst to her, she had inspired. As they greeted each other, Owen felt an overwhelming sense of pride, not in himself, but in the young adults who had risen from the foundation he had laid, now ready to create their own legacies. During the ceremony, Nora spoke first, sharing the story of Owen's journey and how it had transformed not only his life, but the lives of countless others. She highlighted the vision of the foundation, emphasizing the importance of community, of collective effort, and of using privilege and power to uplift those who needed it most. When it was Owen's turn to speak, he felt a familiar surge of nerves. But looking out over the crowd, seeing Leela, Nathan, and the families he'd come to know so well, he felt a sense of calm. "This foundation," he began, "isn't just about me or the work we've done. It's about all of us. It's about the power of community, of believing in one another, of seeing beyond ourselves and finding ways to help others rise." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, lingering on the children who sat at the front, their eyes wide with curiosity and hope. "When I started this journey, I thought that success meant wealth, influence, and recognition. But today, I know that true success is about impact. It's about knowing that we're leaving the world a little better than we found it." He closed his speech with a promise, a commitment that the foundation would continue to build, to invest in communities, and to create spaces of safety, learning, and growth. The applause that followed was heartfelt, a shared acknowledgement of the work they had done together and the work that lay ahead. Over the years, the foundation grew, expanding its reach across cities and even internationally. It built schools in underserved areas, funded scholarships for students from low-income families, and supported shelters for families escaping violence. Owen was involved every step of the way, not as a figurehead, but as a hands-on leader, meeting with communities, listening to their needs, and tailoring each project to ensure it addressed the unique challenges they faced. Each year, he returned to the orphanage to reconnect with the community that had first inspired him. He saw children grow, families thrive, and dreams blossom. Nathan had gone on to become an architect, designing buildings that prioritized accessibility and sustainability. Leela completed her studies and began working as a counselor for children in foster care, providing the support she had once received herself. And every year, he found himself humbled by the resilience, strength, and kindness of the people he served. They taught him more than he could ever teach them, reminding him that his true legacy wasn't in the structures he built, but in the lives he helped transform. As he aged, Owen began to step back from his day-to-day responsibilities, trusting Nora and the foundation's team to carry forward the mission they had built together. But even in retirement, he remained connected to the work, visiting projects, mentoring young architects and social workers, and sharing his story with anyone who would listen. In his final years, Owen returned to the orphanage once more, now a cherished elder in the community. The children flocked to him, eager to hear his stories, to learn from the man who had built not just walls and roofs, but futures. One afternoon, as he sat in the garden watching the children play, Nathan joined him, now a respected architect and one of the foundation's directors. They sat in comfortable silence, the air filled with the sounds of laughter and joy. "Did you ever imagine it would come to this?" Nathan asked, a note of admiration in his voice. Owen shook his head, a smile tugging at his lips. "No," he replied, his gaze distant but content. "I thought I was just saving my company. I never realized that I was saving myself." They sat together as the sun began to set, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink. Owen looked around, his heart full, knowing that his work would live on through the foundation, through Nathan, through Leela, and through every life he had touched. As the children ran around the garden, laughing and playing in the golden light, Owen felt a profound sense of peace. He had found his purpose, his legacy, not in the buildings themselves, but in the futures they made possible, the hope they instilled, and the lives they lifted. And as he closed his eyes, the last light of the day fading into twilight, he knew that he had left behind a world that was, in some small way, better because he had dared to see beyond himself, to build not just with bricks, but with compassion, vision, and love. His journey was complete, but his legacy would live on, a testament to the power of a single, life-altering choice to plant seeds of hope in a world that needed it most.